So we're here with Alex discussing the atheist worldview, and we're talking about meaning. What's the meaning and purpose to life in an atheistic worldview? Or the ultimate meaning or purpose to life?
Yeah, inherently there is none. It just is, where life exists, evolution goes on, natural selection goes on, but there's no goal point. You know, there's nothing we're moving towards. It just kind of exists and continues.
So what would an atheist worldview say is what do most atheists, how do they derive meaning in their life?
We derive meaning a lot of times from the fact that we are sentient beings that can derive meaning. We can apply, constructs of culture. We can decide what is right, what is wrong. We can give life meaning, even though it inherently doesn't have any. That's essentially a power that we can as, thinking creatures.
Mm-hmm.
We can define, we can shape our world. And, which is something that I think a lot of atheists really take as being important of, there's no particular meaning. It might have just been essentially chance that intelligent life ended up occurring on this planet, but now we have an opportunity to give it meaning. We have an opportunity to give our own existence meaning, even if our existence doesn't have any meaning on its own.
Now I've heard, and again from my reading, that there is this sense that at least Dawkins and some of these, evolutionary biologists who are atheists say, look, the only meaning that we have and the only purpose as humans or as any species on Earth is to procreate and to increase our gene pool.
Yeah, but even to a certain extent, I don't know if you can say that's a grander meaning. That's simply, kind of what the evolutionary drive does. But if all life on Earth were to be wiped out, there wouldn't be any kind of universal disturbance. The universe would go on the way it's been going on. We continue, and so that's kind of at our most basic level is, as a species, we want to propagate and continue our species. But we're thinking creatures. We can do more than that. We have science, we have art. We can give meaning in places where there isn't any. For example, we can choose to write a song about, a sunset, where that sunset is just going to occur. But in writing a song about it, we can say, hey, this had meaning to me. This was important. This was an important event to me, and it made me feel something. Good, happy, joyous, whatever. So
I guess in an ultimately meaningless universe, so to speak, without any ultimate purpose or meaning, we in an atheist worldview, you derive meaning from creating it. It's subjective. It's whatever you want it to be. You create it.
Yeah.
But then there's this kind of sense that it still seems that there's a sense that you're driven by your genes and your environment, and that's the ultimate goal, if there was one, was to procreate.
Yeah.
To increase the gene pool.
Essentially.
Like what is Dawkins says, it's raining DNA, and the idea of that, all we are is our DNA, essentially, is what he is kind of paraphrased.
As, my own studies are psychology, and specifically I'm doing a cultural psychology class right now, which studies that. One of the big premises of cultural psychology is, hey, evolutionarily we got a toolkit, essentially to learn, to be able to, learn by more than just endless self-trial and error. We can see what others have done. Others can tell us what we've done. We have the capability of language. We have the capability to form culture. All that is a really basic toolkit essentially given to us by our genes, but we build everything up from there. It's kind of like you hit a certain pressure point. If you have a pressure plate or a trip line, then you build up and you build up and build up, and then it's tripped. In this case, our DNA, that drive to propagate, continue the species, just kind of randomly we went on a path. This path didn't have any particular direction to it. It just kind of rambled towards a greater level of intelligence until we hit a point where, hey, we can now be not even just self-aware, but capable of culture, capable of vicarious learning, capable of language, really complex language that can create meaning, where there wouldn't otherwise be any.
So it's almost kind of, I guess, a twist of fate or irony that we evolved a brain that has the capacity to understand or comprehend the fact that we don't really have any ultimate meaning.
Yes.
That's kind
Essentially, it's kind of a weird
twisted
thing.
situation. Okay, one follow-up question to meaning I have is, in the atheistic worldview, what does love end up being?
It really does essentially end up being, hey, there's these chemicals that fire in your brain and you feel happy, around another person. You feel attached. But again, it comes down to, are we just purely biologically determined, or do we have the ability to give meaning greater, beyond that?
But when you distill down love, it becomes a neurotransmitter like serotonin firing off in the brain to give you the feeling that, hey, I love this woman.
Yeah.
And it could be, I guess, so would it be the same love that I have for a woman would be the same love I have for a steak? I mean, essentially it's firing off similar neurotransmitters, maybe in different parts of the brain,
but it's those different parts of the brain that matter.
Right.
Because
But you would agree with that. I mean, that is essentially
essentially at its basic level. But one of the wonderful things about our brain, one of the wonderful things about consciousness, is all that kind of builds together to give this greater consciousness, sentience. The jury's still a little out, although it is leaning, on the free will thing towards a no, but we're more than just a basic machine of, where if you pull this lever, something, at the other end comes out. It's so complex and vast that even though, you might be able to distill a concept of love down into, okay, this particular neurotransmitter pops out or is secreted in this part of the brain, which activates another part of the brain, et cetera, it's something that we don't experience that. We experience love as this grand emotional explosion.
But it's still at its core is a materialistic entity.
Yeah.
It's not a immaterial, supernatural thing. It's a materialistic entity. Okay.
It is a natural thing.
Yeah.
But we give it meaning and we give it importance, and that is essentially what is important about human existence.
Okay.